Okay, good afternoon. This is Wayne Potter from Joto, and we also have Jimmy Lamb here from Sawgrass. What we're going to do is we're going to try to give you a little better perspective on adding sublimation to your transfer business. It is an exciting process. It gives you a great deal of new latitude for your business and a real sweet way to expand your business, especially coming into the fall markets where you have a lot of team, school, sports, and so forth. So I'd like to welcome everyone who's here, and at that we can get started. Jimmy.
Well, thanks, Wayne. Good to be here. Welcome, everyone. Today's topic, adding sublimation to a transfer business. At least it says transfer business. It doesn't matter what kind of business you have out there. We know a lot of you that have tuned in today are into the transfer business, but really, even if you're just doing, any other form of decoration, maybe potentially you're even do a screen printer or something like that, you're going to find this information is going to be useful for you. So please just keep that in mind as we go through. As Wayne said, my name is Jimmy Lamb. I'm the manager of education for Sawgrass Technologies. It's also worthy of note that I'm a been there, done that kind of guy. So I've actually been out there and run many different types of operations within the decorated products industry. I've done retail, I've done contract and fulfillment and all kinds of different things, a lot of different applications. So, most of what you hear from me is pretty much a been there, done that, got my hands dirty kind of thing, and even bloody every now and then. But hey, not from sublimation. It's a nice, clean thing, okay? So, all right, let's move on with the presentation. So my first question, are you leaving money on the table? And if you're already in business of some kind, especially with product decoration, I'm going to assume that you probably are. You may not be aware of it, or you may be aware of it, but not really happy with it, or just not focused on it. But the reality, you probably are leaving money on the table. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean by that is that you have a lot of customers who need a lot of things, but if you can't provide those things, they're going somewhere else to get them, okay? Chances are, whatever it is you're doing, you're probably only doing one type of operation. Now, within that operation, you may have a couple of different techniques, especially if you're doing some type of digital printing work. But the reality is, if you're just doing one thing, like digital heat transfers, you're only going to get a small segment of the business that your customers actually need to have taken care of, okay? If you're a screen printer, same thing. If you were even an embroiderer, for example, same type of thing. You're getting a small part of all the dollars that your customer has to spend. Now, for many years, that worked pretty darn well, okay? Because I started out that way, just doing one type of product decoration. But more and more, we're finding that you need to be able to do a couple of different things to be able to really get the profits that you want, because you really want to be as much of a one-stop shop as you possibly can be with your customer base. So what happens if you can't fulfill a need? Well, they go elsewhere to get it. That doesn't mean they leave you forever, okay? But if they came into you, for example, and they wanted some shirts, and you took care of some T-shirts for them with some type of transfer and decoration, but you know what? If they needed award products and you didn't do that, then they probably went somewhere else. If they needed promotional products and you didn't do it, they probably went somewhere else. If they needed signage and you really couldn't do what they needed, they probably went somewhere else. So that means that, as I was saying, you're losing part of the spending money that they have. The other aspect is, what happens if they go somewhere else to get those other things, and that somewhere else can also do what you do? Now there's a possibility they may not come back. So we do have to be very careful about what's going on there. So take a look. A lot of you, if you're into transfers, you're doing what? You're doing a lot of apparel stuff, okay? So I'm going to assume for just a minute that you're probably into doing a lot of different apparel stuff, okay? So keeping that in mind, if you look at maybe what some of your existing markets are, for example, schools and sports. If you're in schools and sports and you're just doing the apparel, think beyond that, okay? Because your schools and sports customers have a need for a wide array of decorated products. So you can see here on the screen, here's a whole collection of things. Guess what? They were all done with sublimation, okay? Every one of these has been sublimated. Looking at your corporate and small business customers and going beyond apparel. What are the types of things that they need besides what you're probably presenting to them already? Again, we start seeing things like promotional products, plaques, awards, and a whole lot more. And everything you see on the screen, once again, has been sublimated. Even give some personalization. And you may not be into that. Then again, you may be. Who knows? But when you start talking about the gift and personalization world, there are a lot of good markups there. There's a lot of good opportunities there. But the key is being able to have a variety of products, and in most cases, having some type of photographic image as well as text and potential graphics. Again, everything you see on the screen has been sublimated. So sublimation can make a difference. So if we look at transfers versus sublimation, one of the things I've found in the industry that just really befuddles me sometimes is the word transfer. Because you can talk to 5 different people about what a transfer is, and you can get 5 different definitions of what that is. So in the reality, if we're saying we're looking at transfers versus sublimation, there are so many different types of transfers, it's really hard to narrow that down. One of the more common ones is a print cut type of situation, where you're either cutting out of materials such as vinyls and tackle twill and then applying it with some type of heat backing, or more sophisticated, you're actually doing full color printing onto some type of material that's in a contour cut and applied. So we've got a lot of things going on with that. And then we have the true digital heat transfers, where you're just simply printing onto a carrier paper, and the carrier paper takes the ink over to whatever we're going to put it on. We use heat, and the ink actually leaves the transfer paper, goes onto the surface, and we throw the paper away. So we got a lot of different things going on with that. Okay. Interestingly enough, sublimation actually falls into that digital heat transfer category, because we're doing basically the same thing. We're putting sublimation dye onto a carrier paper, and then we're using heat to force that dye to actually turn into a gas, leave that paper, and then go over to the substrate we're going to decorate. And then we throw the paper away. So on one hand, when we talk about transfers, we're talking about a physical material or film that's being applied that has some type of adhesive on it. Then in another respect, we're talking about using a carrier paper, also called a transfer paper, that's just moving ink from one place to another. So we've got a couple of different things going on. So suffice it to say, they're not the same process. Even though they may look the same, chemically they can be quite different. And sublimation has some very unique characteristics. So even if you're doing something like digital heat transfers, where maybe you're using a ink to be able to apply directly to cotton apparel, for example, it looks the same in process as sublimation, but again, it's quite different. Key sublimation characteristics: will not fade when laundered. Okay, it will not fade, crack, or peel when we put it on apparel and then we go and wash and dry the apparel. That's pretty huge, because a lot of other inks will. It's embedded in the surface instead of on top. And that's why it doesn't crack or peel when it runs through the washing machine and dryer, or when someone wears it over and over again. Because every time you wear apparel, you stretch it. And if you have an ink or some type of material on there that doesn't stretch well with the fabric, eventually it's going to crack and peel. Sublimation's embedded, so that doesn't happen. The image size does not affect production time. And in other words, if we do a big image, it's about the same as a little image, okay? And same thing with cost. Not a lot of cost difference between big and small. No limit to the number of colors can be printed. There's always a limit, okay? It sounds good, though, to say no limit. You can do thousands and thousands of colors, but you may not be able to do every single color on the face of the earth, but you can get pretty darn close, okay? So that's another nice thing, full color imaging that we're doing with sublimation. And it works on many other items beyond apparel products. So if you're kind of wrapped up in a process right now where you're mostly doing apparel, sublimation opens up the doors to be able to do all kinds of other neat stuff out there, okay? And it's a very quick setup and production time, so it's ideal for short runs. People want 1, 2, 3. Hey, you can do it. If they want 100, you can do that too. But there's always a few limitations there. First of all, sublimation only works with polyester and polymer products, which immediately sounds quite limiting until you understand more of what that is all about. Okay, but it has to do with the chemical aspects of sublimation. Sublimation bonds at a molecular level. It does not require any type of adhesives, anything of that nature. It bonds by molecular action. Therefore, it only bonds with polyester and polymer, okay, because that's where the molecular action is taking place. It does not bond to cotton. It does not bond to wood, metal, glass, etc. However, there's plenty of products out there that have polymer coatings in the world of wood, metal, glass, stone, plastics. I mean, there's a lot of different things. So there's a wide range of products, you'll see more of that as we go, that can be sublimated. White is the best color to sublimate on, okay, due to the lack of white ink. We do not have white ink for sublimation. And most of the sublimation products are white to begin with, okay? And we'll touch more on the color aspects in a few minutes. Products must be able to handle 400 degrees during production. I get asked all the time about, can we sublimate on nylon? Well, we have to be careful because nylon can melt below 400 degrees. So approaching ideal sublimation temperatures, a nylon can be a problem. But when we come down to it, it gives us the best of both worlds. And what I mean by this, if you look real closely, this particular shirt over here on the right in the background, it has a transfer on it. Okay, it has a really nice transfer, but it has a transfer. So if you were in the business of being able to do cut, print transfers like you see here, okay, and the Warriors was your customer, when you finished with that shirt, you're pretty much done with them, okay? But they're buying all these other things down here. So all these other things were sublimated. So if you did this type of transfer and sublimation, you would capture all that business. If you only did this type of work, you would only capture that part, okay? And that's what we start talking about, is being able to combine multiple decoration aspects in on every single order to broaden the range of your orders. So what exactly is sublimation? If you're new to sublimation, it's a term you hear, but you don't always know what the heck it means. A lot of people just think it's synonymous with digital printing. It's actually a form of digital printing, but it's in its own world, as I was saying, because it's based on a molecular activity, okay? It's very different. If you look at most inks that we apply to things, if you put inks into a direct-to-garment printer, for example, and print straight out onto the fabric, we have to add some type of adhesive component to the ink itself so that the ink will bond properly to that fabric. And so typically in those types of inks, screen printing inks, direct-to-garment inks, digital transfer inks, most of those inks have some type of adhesive component chemically contained within the ink. So then when we put it under heat, the heat isn't so much to dry the ink as is to fixate the ink by activating that adhesive to the surface, okay? When we talk about sublimation, we don't have any of that, okay? Sublimation is depending on a molecular action to be able to make it all work. Most of your printing does go on the surface. Most inks are applied directly to the surface, whereas sublimation actually bonds at a molecular level subsurface. You can still see it, you just can't feel it, okay? And that's important because it helps to make it a very reliable type of process. It doesn't chip or crack very easily when it's on non-apparel. And of course, when it's on apparel, we don't see the fading, cracking, and peeling when it's laundered. Okay, so the reality is we're going to take an inkjet printer, we're going to load it with sublimation dye, we're going to print onto sublimation transfer paper, which is a unique type of paper, and then we're going to place it on a heat press and sandwich it up to whatever we want to decorate. We're going to apply approximately 400 degrees for about 1 minute with a medium pressure. Two very important things happen. The gas itself, the sublimation dye itself turns into a gas. The second aspect is the polymers. If it's polymer coatings, we're talking about cells. If we're talking about polyester fabric, we're talking about fibers. But the polymers themselves actually have microcells that open up and allow that gas to penetrate. And then when we remove the heat and the pressure, those polyester cells close back up, and they permanently contain sublimation dye within them. Okay, and it sounds kind of like, wow, that works by luck, right? No, it actually works very well and gives you some very good quality printing. Okay, we can define it as high def printing. Okay, it does a fantastic job. Okay, let's talk about that polymer connection a little bit more. I've already told you about polymers and polyesters. The key thing here is that it's either a natural polymer or polyester that we're decorating, or it is some type of product's had a coating added. So, when you talk about companies like Joto who are heavily involved with sublimation, they carry lines of products that do have, proper surfaces so they can be sublimated, okay? And the reality is there's thousands of different products that can be sublimated. I mean, it sounds so limiting when you say, oh, it's got to be a certain type of surface. Well, Not really, because there's enough different manufacturing going on now that it covers a wide range of different products out there. Key factor always is polymer coated. Yes, there are solid wood products that have polymers on them. Now that sounds weird already. Wait a minute, you got a wood product and you put a polymer on it. Does it even look or feel like wood? Yeah, it still looks and feels like wood. Okay, it's not like a rubbery surface or anything when you start talking about it. Same with our metal products. You take metal products and you hit them with your knuckles. It just feels like metal. Looks and feels like metal, but it has that coating applied for sublimation so that the sublimation bonds properly. So anyway, wide range of things, which gives you the ability to reach out to a lot of different customers, a lot of different markets. Now, sublimation itself does a fantastic job of reproducing photographic images. So good that we see wedding portrait photographers using it. So the reality is, and you may not have ever thought about this because you didn't really have to worry about photographic images, you can do some fantastic work and you can reproduce photos at a professional level if need be. Now that market all by itself, the pro photo market, is one that has really high margins, but it has a high level of accuracy being required. Therefore, it has higher margins. But just on everyday work, you start looking at photos, and it can go way beyond gifts and personalization. You can enhance promotional products with photos, and you're going to see some as we go through the presentation, okay? You can enhance award products. If you take an engraved plaque and then you put it next to a photo plaque, and the photo plaque might have a guy sliding into home plate who is the MVP, and that's his plaque. He's the MVP for the game, but here's the picture of him sliding in the home plate and winning the MVP award. And then it's got the team graphics and everything else. You can't do that with engraving, okay? So there are a lot of different ways that we can incorporate photographs in it, and the reason we want to do that is to get better margins, okay? The key to making margins is not formulas. The key is the perceived level of value of what it is that you're selling. It's only worth what someone will pay for it. The key is to establish a high perceived value so that you can get higher margins without higher costs on your part. And the way you do that, of course, is to be able to make the product as appealing as you can to the audience you're presenting it to. Then finally, sublimation in apparel. Yeah, I've bounced around the word polyester a couple of times. It does not work on cotton. But you know what? Poly performance apparel is one of the top sellers out there, okay, especially in the sports and school market. When we talk about poly performance, we're talking about polyester products that have been manufactured with moisture wicking cells so that when you wear the product, it pulls the perspiration away from your skin. And we can thank a company called Under Armour for really making this mainstream consumer product focused, okay? And of course everybody else has jumped in on it too. They're not the only guys doing it. But you use that to advantage when you're selling because you can say, you know, we carry poly performance garments just like Under Armour, okay? So as soon as you say Under Armour, people start to equate it with a higher price point because Under Armour is not cheap, okay? And that's important to remember because if we're doing poly performance products with sublimation, a couple of key things here. Number one, poly performance is more comfortable than 100% cotton. Trust me, I know. I'm out there every day putting my miles in, and you know the poly performance, where it doesn't keep you from sweating, okay, just the way it wicks the moisture away from your skin, makes you not feel so sticky as you do with 100% cotton. Everybody talks about how 100% cotton breathes so well, okay? So the reality, a poly performance garment is a better garment for active lifestyles than 100% cotton. Okay, if you sublimate it, the sublimation will outlast the garment. It's not going to fade, crack, or peel over time. And it's actually, in most cases, a stronger, more well-built fabric such that, again, it outlasts that cotton garment. Now, the reality is that makes it all a little bit more expensive. And that's important because you don't really try to compete directly against cotton or 50-50 with a poly performance product. It's a different type of product at a higher level of quality and performance. So, you know, these things are important, but I tell you, when you go to sublimate them, you got something that's pretty cool and it's going to last, you know. You got to think about that. So you cannot sublimate cotton, okay? But you can sublimate 50-50. If you sublimate a blend, it's only going to bond with the polyester aspect of the blend. So it takes on a bit of a faded out look, which is to your advantage because, you know, everything about pricing, okay, making good margins, it's all about marketing, okay? Everybody thinks pricing is a formula. It's all about marketing, okay, because it goes back to what I just said, perception, right? So you got to use keywords. Yeah, if you sublimate 50-50, it looks faded out. Okay, faded out sounds sort of like a negative. Use a word like retro. It gives a retro look. Okay, retro makes it sound like it's special. You could charge more. Okay, you could charge more by using the word retro. You could say, listen, for this situation, I got a great idea. The retro look would be so cool for what you need. Okay, now retro costs a little bit more. Okay, but the effect is fantastic. Okay, is what you're looking for, and so you get them pumped up with that, and you charge more money. It didn't cost you any more. It took the same amount of ink, the same amount of time, the same amount of effort to do it, and the 50-50 shirt was less anyway. But yet you positioned it as a more superior product than maybe your traditional sublimation. Okay, so keep that in mind. All right, well, we'll move on. Okay, the sublimation process, if you're not really familiar how it works, I always like to just give you a real quick brief show. We don't do it by video. Video doesn't work well in webinars. We do it by slides. Okay, so if you're going to get into sublimation, you need 3 basic components. You need a computer. Raise your hand if you don't have one. That's what I thought. Okay, you also need a heat press. A lot of you have a heat press. I will tell you, without getting too long-winded, there's a big difference between a good quality heat press and a not so good quality heat press. In the world of sublimation, we're very, very press sensitive. We need to have accurate temperature over the entire platen of that heat press, as well as accurate pressure each and every time we use it. Okay, got to have those 2 things combined to get the results that we need. So there's a lot of heat presses that are very cheaply made that you might have found on eBay or somewhere like that. Not to say that people don't sell good stuff on eBay, but what I'm getting at is if you found a really discounted heat press, and maybe it's working fine for some of your transfer business already, because in that case you're probably just depending on getting an approximate heat to activate some type of adhesive, you're probably okay. But you get into sublimation, if you start seeing imbalance in colors and things like that, it may be your heat press. So we always do recommend that you have a good quality heat press for sublimation. Okay, and then the final piece is an inkjet printer that's loaded with sublimation dye. Now you cannot use just any printer. Okay, I mean, first of all, we make the sublimation inks to fit specific printers. Okay, because we had to put it in a cartridge for one thing, so it has to plug in. But the reality is there's a limited number of printers, and it has a lot to do with their head technology, but the printers that are being used for sublimation are off-the-shelf, office-style printers. Okay, what I mean by that is it's not a $25,000 custom build. That's an important thing to understand. You look at some of the specialty printing out there, it's a custom-built machine from the ground up, therefore it has a higher price tag. This keeps the price tag much lower in the world of sublimation because of the fact that it's using standardized equipment produced by reputable companies like Epson and Ricoh. Okay, so we go through what we call a 3-step process: create, print, press. The first step is to create whatever we're going to do. I'm going to make some coasters for you real quick. Let me make it quick and simple here. And the coasters here are round, as you can see. But our artwork is square. So how do we make square artwork fit a round coaster? Well, a lot of these products, the blanks that you buy, you can download a template for that blank. And in fact, a lot of times you can download the template in a file format that's created specifically for the graphics program you're using. For example, CorelDRAW or Photoshop, which are the 2 most common software programs used for sublimation. In this case, I'm going to use CorelDRAW. For CorelDRAW, I will download this template in a CDR format. And so it's vectorized, and then I'm going to take my piece of artwork, which by the way is not vectorized, and I'm going to merge the 2 together, and I'm going to use the power clip function, and what it did was it cropped and sized the image to fit that template. Now in the world of sublimation, we normally make our artwork a little bit larger than the actual item. So the blue area here represents the actual coaster, and it's accurate to the exact size and dimension. And then the green represents a little overbleed. So we're making our image just a little bit larger, gives us a margin for error when we're lining things up. Okay. If you're a Photoshop user, you can use a layers function to achieve pretty much the same thing. So we're going to set up the piece of artwork on the screen, and then we're going to print it out using sublimation ink and sublimation transfer paper. And we also want to try and place as many of these on one sheet of paper as we can, because we can print out and heat press multiple units at the same time if they'll all fit, and that's what we want to do. So in my case, I did 4. Okay, so I printed out 4, and you can see the printout here. Now I'm going to take the blank coaster, and I'm actually putting a little piece of heat tape. It looks like Scotch tape. It's not Scotch tape. This is heat tape. It withstands 400 degrees. You can see clearly that the artwork is slightly bigger than the coaster, and that's good. In case the coaster is not perfectly centered, it's still going to work. Okay, the idea is to get it perfectly centered, but you know, a lot of things we can get close and we're okay. All right, so I'm going to put those down. I'm going to carry it over to the heat press. I'm going to put it in the heat press. I'm going to set my heat press, in this case, 400 degrees for 1 minute with a medium pressure. I'm going to close it down 1 minute. All that chemistry takes place that we were just talking about. I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to immediately peel the paper away from the coasters. The paper goes in the garbage, and it's hot. We peel it while it's hot. But I just did 4 coasters at once, and my total production time was 2 to 3 minutes or so to get that done. So what my whole point is, it's a pretty simple process. Whether I'm doing this on a shirt, a plaque, flip-flops, fishing lures, believe it or not. Yes, there are fishing lures for sublimation, coasters, whatnot. It's the same kind of process, okay? Quick and simple, desktop style setup. Now, we got a couple of different production variables. Neat thing about sublimation is easy to learn, okay? It's easy to learn, but there are some variables to understand as you go, okay? When you look at our standard production settings, we are very specific on settings for our different products. And there may be some variations between products, but most products are 1 minute, 400 degrees, at 40 psi, but nobody knows what 40 psi is, so medium pressure, okay? A good medium pressure is what we need. And we need all 3 things to make it work. We can't have 1 of 2 or 2 of 3 or whatever. We have to have all 3 working consistently to make this happen. That's why I say the heat press is a very important aspect of what we're doing, okay? Buying a good heat press, they're not all created equally. There's lots of different brands up there. You know, work with Joto as to their sublimation specialists. They understand heat presses. They can help you find the best product for your needs, okay? Color management. You know, if you've never done digital printing, this is one of those things that will kind of throw you for a loop the first time out, because you know, if you've never really done this, you're going to find pretty quick that what you see on the screen isn't necessarily what prints out. So that gets people frustrated. You don't even have to be doing sublimation to have this problem. Okay, there's a lot of things that go into play here. I'm going to try to make this simple here for you, not get too deep into what it's all about. But when we're working with a monitor, we're generating colors using light and a process called RGB. We're combining red, green, and blue to be able to create different colors. If we combine equal amounts of all 3, red, green, and blue, we get white. If we have no color, absence of color is black. That's because the screen's black, okay? And then anything other percentages gives us a wide variety of colors. And we get a huge range of color in RGB, absolutely huge range. And that's represented here, because that's what we call gamut, the range of color. So here, this thumbnail is representing the visible spectrum of color. And you can see we get a big chunk of it represented with RGB. Now, when we go over to our printer, and we're using a new process, or different process, called CMY, cyan, magenta, and yellow. And in this case, we are working with percentages of those 3 colors. If we put equal percentages of all 3 colors, we get black. Absence of color gives us white. And then other combinations give us other combinations. But you can see the gamut here is a lot smaller. And these are just representations. Yes, you can print green. Okay, these are just representations. But the idea is for you to understand a couple of things. Number one, I'm using one type of system to generate my color on the screen, a totally different type of system to do it over here, and the range of color from here to here is significantly different. And the reality is there's not an exact match for every CMY as to every RGB, okay? Now, we have software called color management software, which helps to match colors. And match is the best word, map the color. Because as it goes from here to here, there's all kinds of other variables. Okay, we're not just going to go from RGB to CMY. We are talking about there's a lot of variables. When you get down to the sublimation level, here are some of the different variables we have to worry about. We got to worry about the printer itself, the ink set that's being used, the paper that's being used, and the substrate it's all going on. All 4 of those things actually have an impact on what the final color looks like. Okay, with digital inks. So we have a lot of challenges going through the system, and this is why when you just try to arbitrarily print from the screen to your printer, you usually don't get a good match. Now, a lot of people say, well, we'll just calibrate the screen. No, it really don't work that way. I mean, there's a lot more going on. It's not about calibrating the screen. Unfortunately, with computer monitors too, just so you're aware, You can have 4 different monitors showing the exact same image, and it'll show it in 4 different ways. Okay. In other words, the color variations will be different between all of them. The key aspect for everything is that we get out what we need out. And I know most of you want to design on the screen, but when you're working with digital printing, a lot of times it's hard to design color on the screen. Okay. What really helps is if the customer actually gives you something that's been printed somewhere in the exact right colors, so you have a visible representation to be able to match. Because I'm telling you, one of the classes I teach routinely at shows, I will show people like multiple T-shirts, and they're the exact same brand of T-shirt, and I use the exact same image file for each of the T-shirts, but they were printed through 4 different, in this case, direct-to-garment printers, and in each case, the color is different, even though it's the same type of ink, not the same brand, same type, okay? And we try to eliminate all the variables, but the variables we couldn't eliminate were we had 4 different printers, and they interpret it 4 different ways. So just because you have an RGB code doesn't mean that you can always get out what you're expecting in CMY. Have I confused you all yet? Hope not. Anyway, we try to make this easier. Okay, so with our Sawgrass systems, if you purchase one of the Sublimation systems through Joto, we make available to you a free software driver called Power Driver. And Power Driver has had all these algorithms and things built in the background, because that's kind of how color management works, where it's taking whatever the inputted RGB color is, and then it's adjusting that color by taking into account all the variables along the way, such that it gives the best match that it can of CMY on the far end as it comes out of the heat press. Because we have to take into account with sublimation that it goes through the heat press after it goes through the printer. That affects color too. Okay, so all those things are being taken into account here. Doesn't mean you get a perfect match of color, and a lot of times you'll be struggling. You'll get your colors look really good except for maybe one, and it's like, I can't quite get this one to work. Well, we do have what we call spot color management aspects in that software that allow you to really fine-tune a specific color you're having trouble with. And just to make it very simple here, what we'll do is for each printer and ink that we create, we also create a basic line of colors that we know can be printed accurately with that setup. And we put those base colors into what's called a palette, and then that palette's available to you. Now, you can take that palette and you can upload an electronic version into Corel, Photoshop, or Illustrator, such that when you're working on your designs, you're choosing your colors off that palette. Now, this is important, okay? You're choosing your colors off that predefined palette of color. At the same time, we recommend you take that palette of color and you actually print it out and sublimate it onto, usually we say start out with a sheet of metal that has a white coating, because it gives you a really good representation of what the true colors should look like. Now, when they print out onto that sheet of metal, well, they print out on a paper, then you sublimate it onto the metal. Each one has a number that corresponds to the RGB setup for it, and it has a name, okay? So let's see if we can show you how that looks. Here we go. So here I'm printing out a palette out of a printer, and let's say that this is the red that I was interested in. Let's say I'm having some trouble with red, can't quite seem to match the red the right way. So I'll go ahead and print this palette out, and now I can look at these reds and I can see what it looks like. Remember, you got to print it and press it. Okay, got to take you through that. But then you can look at it and say, here's the red that's the closest match. We'll look at the name of the red. Let's say it's red 1, okay? Now I can go to my electronic palette and I can choose red 1. It may not look right on the screen, but we know what it looks like on the back end. That's what we want to know. Now, what happens if that red 1 still doesn't match what you need? You can then take it to another step. We have tools in there so that you can generate a palette of red variations based on that initial red 1 that we were playing with. And then you will print those and press them onto something so you can see them. And what you're essentially doing is you're expanding your palette and fine-tuning till you find the right match, and then you can save that color into your system and name it anything you want, so you can reference it any time you need it. So there is a process to be able to really fine-tune color. You'll learn more about it when you get into the sublimation. It's not that hard. Our Power Driver system is very easy to work with, and once you start playing with it, you get comfortable with it, and you can, really do a lot with it. Now, just as important as understanding how to set color up to get it all the way through the right way, we also have to understand how the color of the surface that we're decorating affects it. I said early on, white is the best color. When we put it on a pure white surface, we really have no problems getting our colors to be consistent. But when I start putting them on colored surfaces, it's going to affect how the ink itself looks. Digital inks are transparent. Being transparent means that the background color that we're putting it on can have an effect on the ink color itself. And that's not just for sublimation, that's for pretty much any type of digital ink, but definitely with sublimation, okay? If you're looking at dark products and you're a screen printer or a DTG person, you're probably using something called white ink, okay? And you're able to put down a layer of white ink first with your equipment, and then you put all the colored ink on top. So the reality is you're not printing on black, you're printing on white. You just created an artificial white area. If you're doing transfers with a print cut system, you're probably creating some type of white background using some type of film that goes through your system, and then you're printing color directly on top of it, and it's going on as sort of almost like an emblem, okay? Same thing. You created a white background first, and then the ink went on top. We're unable to do that with sublimation. We do not have white ink capabilities with sublimation. Remember, sublimation has to actually penetrate into the fibers of whatever we're decorating. White ink would get in the way. Doesn't happen. So we may struggle a little bit when we're dealing with apparel. Why? Because apparel comes in different colors. All the other stuff we do with sublimation comes in pretty much one color, white. And there are some special products that were purposely done in, say, some silvers and golds and whatever for special effects, but pretty much everything comes to the white surface. But when we go into apparel, if I sublimate the white shirt here, everything comes up pretty good, okay? Everywhere that should be white in the image is left as no color because the printer is not capable of producing the color white. So in other words, there's no color at the neck and here in the claw or in the baseball, right? And that's fine because the background color of the shirt works for us. But when we go to a yellow shirt, what happens is all those white areas are now yellow because there's no color there, okay? Now, one other thing happened too. If you look closely, the Eagles itself, the whole entire logo, looks like the colors are muted somewhat compared to this. And that's because that yellow background affected those colors when they went on there, okay? So the reality is when we're talking about white ink, it's not just for dark shirts. It could be for light colored shirts. I mean, if you needed to do this the right way, you put down white ink on this light shirt and then you put everything on top, but we don't have white ink for sublimation. So that is one of the drawbacks on sublimation. But as I mentioned, we have most of our substrates are white, and you can print on colors. A lot of people don't think you can print on colors with sublimation. You can. You just have to, pay attention to how does the background color affect the ink color, and I can't reproduce the color white when I do something, okay? So most of our things that are not apparel, if I needed this photo panel here to be black, I don't start with a black photo panel. I start with a white one. And then I create a graphic that has the wolf, the black background, everything else, so that I'm recoloring it to get my final result, okay? So what does it cost? Well, it depends. When you look at sublimation startup costs, I just give a range. Remember, I don't sell anything. I work in the ink manufacturing division. Joto is the one that you buy from, and Joto has their own different package prices. So, I try to give you a range. I try to be conservative on the low end at $575. I mean, that's probably higher than most startup packages, but whatever. If you only needed a printer and inks and paper to get started, and you're probably buying the Ricoh 3110, which is an ideal startup sublimation printer, you're probably in that range, okay? If you need to add a heat press, it's going to go up, okay? Because heat presses, good quality heat presses, have a pretty substantial price tag. But if you buy a good quality press, it'll last you practically forever. Okay, and it'll pretty much guarantee excellent sublimation over and over again. You may go to a larger printer, okay, and a larger printer has a higher price tag, and then you got to get a bigger heat press. So that's why you see a range like that, okay? But I'll tell you, most people start out with a Ricoh 3110, and if you have a heat press, you're getting into it for a very low startup cost. There is no specialized software. You're just going to use CorelDRAW, Photoshop, or Illustrator, pretty much. What about imaging? This 8-inch by 10-inch graphic averages about 50 cents in cost and can print in under 30 seconds on a Ricoh 3110. As a general rule of thumb, we reference the ink cost at a penny per square inch. Okay, we do have printers that are cheaper than a penny per square inch, but it's just a nice simple rule of thumb. Remember, it takes ink and it takes paper, so both those things go together. But really, for the printing costs, for the total for that particular image was about 50 cents. I think it was actually 54. I rounded off to 50. So it's a fairly low cost as far as per image or per coverage of what we're putting down with ink. Some comparisons across the industry. I don't know what you currently do or don't do. If you look at the average cost per square inch, you can see where sublimation clocks in right here. If you're doing a print cut system where a lot of people do for transfers, you can see it's quite a bit higher. Laser's a bit higher. Chromoplast is a product that we carry. It's for cotton printing. It's a little bit higher. The paper is a little bit more than the ink cost. So you can see sublimation is definitely on the lower end in your average cost per square inch. When you look at throughput, throughput's how fast it goes through the system. And you can see sublimation, again, pretty quick. It ranks up there pretty highly with some of these other products. Print cut's fairly slow. Sublimation's pretty fast. Average startup cost. You can see at the high end things like DTG and flatbed printing, because they have very sophisticated printers that were built specifically for that purpose from the ground up. We're able to utilize off-the-shelf components, and it keeps our costs much lower down. Okay, so bottom line is making money. Okay, and as I like to say, it's all about perception. Okay. It's all about perception. What is this worth? If you look on the screen, you see a blank phone cover. Very popular item, by the way. Blank phone cover. What's it worth when you're looking at a blank like that? I mean, what the heck? They do sell blanks in the cell phone stores and whatnot, but they're not usually just a blank white like that. They usually have something going on, a brighter color, or some stripes or something. I don't know. Okay. Pretty much not very interesting is my point until we sublimate it. So now I've gone and sublimated, and now I've put young Mr. Hendricks on there. Now what's it worth? Well, to the Hendricks family, it's worth a lot, okay? It didn't cost me very much to do that, but just by what I put on there, it went from being worth, what, $3 to being worth maybe 30 to 35, okay? We are seeing those kind of numbers in the retail personalization marketplace for sublimated products. Taking a look at some numbers just to throw out there, that particular blank was about $3.25. The image cost was 13 cents. I put in $2 for labor and overhead. I mean, that's probably a little high, but be honest, be a little conservative. Came out to $5.38. So if my total was $5.38 and I doubled it, a lot of people do that. They just double it and then go sell it, okay? If I doubled it, I would have sold it for what? Just under $11. It's crazy. Retail consumer price, 35 definitely is the high end. We've seen ranges 30 to 35. We're seeing some people doing 25. And now you're starting to you get enough people out there selling these things, you get people start getting stupid and they start selling them for, really cheap. Like $15 when you could easily sell it for a lot more. That's sad, but that unfortunately happens. But I will tell you this. I was in Walmart the other day. On the wall, customer service area, I saw something similar, and they had a posted price tag of $28.95 for a custom phone cover. Walmart, $28.95. Okay? Walmart is the low price leader, but they set the price bar on low price. So therefore, they're selling for $28.95. There's no reason you can't sell it for higher. Okay, because nobody should be selling at Walmart's rate, right? Okay, so you sell it for $30, still making a lot of money. You sell it for $25, you're still making a lot of money. What the heck? If you're selling it to somebody else to resell it, and that's what these other numbers are, you can still make some decent money. Okay, what if you were selling to somebody who was a retailer, and what kind of money can be made there? So if it costs you $5.38 to make it, maybe you're doing these in a mass run of the same thing over and over again, and you're able to sell it for, say, $13, okay? And then they're going to sell it for, say, $22. They're still making some decent money, and you're making decent money, okay? So, I mean, the point being here is it isn't, when you start looking at what you can sell something for, it's not about doubling the cost. It's about what it's worth to whoever the target audience is. And in so many cases, we can just put a little bit of ink on there and a bit of zazzle, and suddenly we got something that's worth a lot of money, and we can make a lot of margin. That's my whole point, okay? That's where margin comes from. So bottom line, sublimation expands your markets on a budget. Okay, it's ideal for a transfer of business or any other kind to expand their markets and offer a variety of full-color, high-margin items to a wide range of new and existing customers. Okay, lot of great possibilities there. And that pretty much concludes what I had to say. I'm going to invite Wayne back in so we can wrap up, see if you have any questions going on here. And let me, oops, that's not what I meant to do. Let me get Wayne's email address on here too so that you can follow up with Wayne if you have some more questions coming up. You there, Wayne?
Yeah, Jimmy, we're having a thunderstorm, so we'll have a little punctuation of lightning and thunder, but other than that, I'm still here. I guess the thing that I'd like to add here is a couple of things. When you're talking about heat transfer presses, you have to understand that the press you buy will not only serve sublimation, but it'll serve every other kind of heat applied product that you intend to involve yourself in. So it makes good sense to buy a good machine that will give you very good and even pressure and good heat over the entire surface of the platen, and one that's fairly well built, because it's a fairly substantial expense and you want it to last a little bit of time. So that's I think a little additional information with respect to what Jimmy had to say about the actual heat transfer press itself.
I can't stress enough what you're saying there, Wayne. Early on I bought the wrong heat press. We'll leave it at that. And not only was it the wrong heat press, it was a very cheap, no-name kind of press. And I was proud of myself, patting myself on the back because I got a good deal, And, then the first thing that happened was the digital indicator for the heat quit working. Kind of hard to set the temperature when that doesn't work. So, the reality is the heat press is such a versatile piece of equipment, and getting the right one that does what you need it to do and does it for the next 20 years is key.
The other thing that I'd like to share with each of you is that in the recent, I'd say in the past 2 years, what we've seen is a tremendous, let's say, move by the individuals who are doing personalization to things like cell phones, water bottles. Both of those items can be personalized. The water bottle needs to be done with a mug press, but the cell phone can be done with a flatbed press. We have an enormous number of, let's say, photographers who are doing water bottles with a photographic picture that end up as favors to the wedding party. I think Jimmy alluded early on to the photographic use for photographers. If you go to a flea market or go to an art show, you'll inevitably see what they call a metal print there, and that's a rendering of the artist's artwork that's been converted into a digital image, and it's been imaged and printed with sublimation, and it's being sold to you on this piece of coated metal, and it's quite a very nice looking product. It probably has caught on a lot more than, of course, the old artist canvas, stretch artist canvas, but in a dropout frame, it's quite exciting, and that's become kind of a staple for people who are doing art or who are doing photography for weddings. We have customers who decorate pick guards, for example, that are being put onto guitars. So if you're let's say if you're famous enough to have a band that you want to have an individualized pick guard, you can buy it, and that's done with sublimation. So there are a lot of interesting products, some of what are really kind of only limited by your imagination. The important thing, I guess, to come away with here is that if you only do shirts, as Jimmy says, you're walking away from a lot of business. And you're putting yourself at risk that when they find somebody to do these other items, that they also do shirts, and you end up losing a customer. That would be the very worst case, but you're definitely leaving money on the table if you don't expand your business into these areas, because I guarantee you your competitors are doing it, and they're doing it at quite a, I would say, a pretty good increase pace, that they're jumping into decorating these hard surface items. I don't think I have much else. I'd like to thank Jimmy for his time and for his presentation, and I guess, can we take questions if anyone has any? Hello, Jimmy.
Oh, here I am. Yes, we can take questions.
There you go.
It's just a matter of typing them
Okay.
in and sending them over to us. If you're new to using the webinar, look at the top right-hand corner. You'll see a red rectangle with a white arrow. If you click on it, it opens your control panel, and then you can type in the message down there at the bottom, and then it sends over here. So if you do have any questions, now would be the time to send. And of course, I put our email addresses up so that if you have questions later, you can certainly contact us later.
This is worse than
Okay.
silent movies.
Well, here we go. I know, when they come to me, by the way, you don't get to see it, Wayne. I have to read it out to you. So how small of a product can you print on? Like, are you able to print on pins and those kind of things?
Well, I can tell you, when you say pen, you're probably talking about a thermoplastic item. And obviously, thermoplastic material will not withstand the kind of heat needed to bring the ink to a sublimation point. I can conceive of the following. If you had a fairly good size diameter pen, and it was metal, and it actually had a polymer coating, the answer would be yes. You'd need to have some kind of a fixture that you could create with basically with woodworking tools, and you'd lay the pen in there and then lay the paper over top of it. So I can conceive of the fact that yes, you could, but probably not with thermoplastic.
Yeah, we see people sublimating on refrigerator magnets, and some of them are pretty small. I've seen jewelry that was created for sublimation. Okay, they didn't go down to Tiffany's and buy it, but I've seen sublimatable jewelry that's very small. So the reality is, it's not about size. It's really more of what Wayne just said. It has to do with the material. Is there a coating we can purchase to put on an item and then work it for sublimation?
I can tell you, Joto does not sell a coating, but I know there are a number of people on the internet who are reputable that are marketing a coating. In effect, it's a polyester resin material. You would either need to roll it or spray it. One caution for you in terms of spraying it: when you spray this coating, because it probably has some kind of a solvent system in it, you need to make sure that you used some kind of breathing apparatus to avoid inhaling the vapor mist, which would be quite fine. I guess you could dip it in that coating as well, but pretty much it's a polyester resin material.
Now, the thing about getting coatings on that you also need to be aware of is, if you have an inconsistent coating, you'll have an inconsistent sublimation. So, I caution people that coatings sound easy. The reality is they're not very easy to really get it put down properly, okay? For example, and this is my favorite example, is if you've ever spray painted before, and what's the first thing you usually learn? That you're not a very good painter, because what you'll see is, let's say if I'm putting white spray paint on a black surface, you'll notice that there's inconsistencies of coverage. Some places it'll look thin and you'll see the background color, and other places you'll get some runs because you put too much. So if you're getting that kind of inconsistency, then your sublimation is going to be just as inconsistent as your coating. The other thing to keep in mind is that the coating actually bonds properly to the material you're spraying. So don't expect it to be a one-size-fits-all. So you got to pay very close attention. If you're going to try and do your own coatings, I would caution you to go out and experiment and do a lot of experimentation. You're going to do some things. You're going to sublimate them, see how they come out. You're going to drop them. You're going to kick them around. You know, you want to make sure that you got a good quality. It's going to stay there like it's supposed to.
Jimmy, what I might add there is that it may be one of those penny wise and pound foolish situations, because I think if you can probably find most anything that's been professionally coated in some kind of a factory environment that is adequate for sublimation printing. And if you're talking about doing a normal item that's available, I would definitely think by the time you pay for the coating, go through the process, go through the learning curve, that you'd be better off concentrating your time on purchasing one that's professionally coated, decorating it, and making the cash register ring rather than putzing around with all that stuff.
Yeah,
now, if you're talking about a product that's totally different than what can be purchased, well, then it might be worth the experimentation.
I agree 100% with everything you just said there. That's definitely the way to go, because the reality is there's lots and lots of things out there that are already factory made, good quality, ready to be sublimated. But if you're going to do a unique line of something, then it might be worth the time, effort, and money to do the experimentation to see what you can produce. Okay, you spoke about apparel lasting when laundered, but how about sublimated mugs and water bottles in the dishwasher? Would these last through routine washings, or would we better hand wash these products?
I would say this. I have mugs that when I first got involved with sublimation was many years ago at Airwaves, and I have mugs that were produced probably 20 some odd years ago of my kids and dogs and so forth that are still in our closet and still get occasional use. So I think that there's no major concern with a mug or a coated item, providing that it's a good coating and providing that you're using the Sawgrass ink systems because their ink system is stable to light. And I don't think that's a major concern or issue for in normal use.
I second that. It is true that if you heat sublimation back up to the mid 300s to 400 degrees, it can start to regas again. But I haven't found too many dishwashers that get up that high in temperature. So, I don't think you're going to see any kind of problems with that, because your average dishwasher is nowhere near that hot.
And most of that regassing is basically manifested itself as a blurred image rather than a disappearing image.
Right. Okay, additional questions? As always, you can follow up with us, and we do encourage you to come up with any questions you have and just send them over. I mean, we'll do our best to answer questions for you at any time. That's what we do. So that you get the right kind of information to make the best decisions for yourself. Okay, Wayne, that seems to be the questions for today. So I'm going to go ahead and step out, and I just want to say thanks for inviting me in today, and thank you everyone for coming in and for your questions, and I look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
Okay, thanks, Jimmy, and I'll add that greeting myself, and if there is anything that anyone would like to talk about, you have my email address, and you're certainly welcome to give me a call, or Jimmy for that matter, and we'd be glad to spend some time with you. So at that, you have a good day and take care.